Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've been glued to the financial news lately, I bet you felt that familiar knot of anxiety in your stomach. Headlines are absolutely screaming about downturns, market contractions, and, just general economic doom. But the source material we're unpacking today, the Insight Vault recession analysis, it completely flips that narrative on its head. It actually argues that a recession isn't some financial apocalypse, but rather a profound opportunity. So today, we're breaking down exactly why the wealthy literally look forward to economic downturns, and we're going to unpack the precise roadmap they use to build generational wealth right when everyone else is running for the exits. So ask yourself honestly right now, are you ready for the crash? Most people simply aren't. Most people hear the word crash and their immediate instinct is to panic, to freeze up, or just hide. And hey, that anxiety you might be feeling, it's completely valid. The economy is a massive, complex beast, and downturns do bring real-world challenges. But what if we could take that anxiety and convert it into anticipation? What if instead of being a victim of macroeconomic cycles, you could position yourself to be the primary beneficiary of them? By the end of this analysis, I promise you won't be fearing the crash, you'll be actively preparing for the incredible opportunities it creates. Okay, let's dive right into this. The warning signs, decoding the data. Now, before we can talk about wealth creation, the Insight Vault data paints a pretty stark picture of the current economic weather. We aren't just guessing that a storm is coming, we're reading the instruments, and they are flashing red. First up, we have the inverted yield curve. It's a notoriously reliable predictor where short-term debt actually yields higher than long-term debt. Crazy, right? Next to that, we're seeing rising consumer debt defaults, which basically tells us the average person is running out of financial runway. Finally, shrinking corporate margins show that businesses are feeling a massive squeeze. When we compare these current data points to the levels we saw just before the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 contraction, well, the parallels are striking. The macroeconomic storm isn't just a probability anymore. According to the data, it is an incoming reality. And historically, when these three specific indicators align, it brings a very specific and very stark market reaction. 40%. Just let that number sit with you for a second. Historically, this is the average equity drop we see across the board when the bubble finally bursts and a true recession takes hold. Now, for the unprepared investor, watching your portfolio drop by 40%, that is terrifying. It's the kind of number that causes sleepless nights and totally panic-driven selling. But I really want to challenge you to look at that number differently, starting right now. That 40% drop isn't a permanent loss of value. Actually, scratch that. It's not a loss at all. It is a massive 40% discount on the world's most premium assets. Which brings us to redefining the recession, the great wealth transfer. To capitalize on that massive discount, Insight Vault suggests we have to completely change the way we think about market contractions. Recessions are not chaotic, random acts of financial destruction. No, they're cyclical, they're mathematically predictable, and they are entirely manageable wealth transfer events. And they're driven by two opposing psychologies. And this brilliantly illustrates it. On the left, we have the panic mindset. This is the herd. They watch their portfolios drop, fear takes over, they sell their assets at the absolute bottom, and they hoard whatever cash they have left under the mattress. But over on the right, we have the profit mindset. This is what the institutional investors and the ultra-wealthy are doing. They're taking their strategically held liquid capital and using it to aggressively acquire those heavily discounted assets the panicked herd is dumping. It's the exact same economic environment, but with entirely different behaviors. There's a quote from the Insight Vault analysis that completely strips away the doom and gloom. And honestly, it is the single most important concept to internalize today. Read it again. A recession is not the destruction of wealth, but the transfer of it from the fearful to the prepared. I mean, wow. If you can cement this shift in perspective in your mind, you stop being just a passenger on the economic roller coaster, and you become the one actually operating the controls. All right, let's look at the wealth transfer mechanics. Why assets go on sale. Now, what's really interesting about this is the why. Why exactly do world-class assets suddenly go on sale for pennies on the dollar? Well, the analysis points to a specific mechanical failure in the market ecosystem, the liquidity crunch. You see, during an economic boom, everyone borrows money. Institutions, hedge funds, retail investors, probably even that neighbor of yours who just bought a brand new boat. They all get over-leveraged. But when the recession hits and credit freezes up, suddenly there is a severe shortage of cash. The bill comes due, and these over-leveraged investors simply don't have the liquid cash to pay it. So to survive, they're forced to liquidate everything. They literally have to sell their absolute best high-value assets at rock-bottom prices just to generate cash immediately. They are selling out of total desperation, not valuation. And that right there is exactly why premium assets become incredibly cheap. And when you step in to buy those desperate sales, the recovery data maps out exactly what comes next. Yes, the average bear market drop, represented by that red bar on the left, is painful. Nobody's denying that. But look at the subsequent 5-year bull market gain towering on the right. That is where the math gets staggering. By acquiring your favorite fundamentally sound assets when they're dragged down during the liquidity crunch, you aren't just recovering when the market turns. You're getting a slingshot effect from a recovering economy that creates massive, massive portfolio multipliers. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because understanding what happens is vital, but knowing exactly when to act is what separates the winners from the losers. Historically, a downturn follows a very specific anatomy. First, the peak in months 1 to 3. Things look great right before they don't. Then the crash in months 4 to 9, where that panic mindset totally takes over. But right here, during months 10 to 14, this is the trough. This is your historical buying window. The fear is at absolute maximum. The forced liquidations are peaking, and asset prices hit the floor. If you deploy your capital right here, you get to ride the massive wave of the recovery over the next 1 to 5 years. So let's talk strategies for getting rich, the action plan. We understand the psychology, we know the mechanics, and we've seen the timeline. Now it's time to get tactical. The Insight Vault analysis provides a super clear step-by-step order of operations. Step 1, secure liquidity. Cash is literally the oxygen of a recession. If you don't have cash, you can't buy the discounted assets. It's that simple. Build your cash reserves now before the credit markets freeze. Step 2, identify distressed assets. You got to do your homework today. Create a watch list of fundamentally strong companies or properties that you would absolutely love to own, but are currently way too expensive. Step 3, execute purchases incrementally. Don't try to catch a falling knife by guessing the absolute bottom day. Nobody can do that. When we enter that 10 to 14-month buying window, just dollar cost average your way into those distressed assets. And where exactly should you point that capital? The historical data points directly to these prime targets for acquisition. First up, blue chip dividend equities. We're talking massive companies with ironclad balance sheets that essentially pay you to hold them while you wait for the recovery. Next, undervalued real estate investment trusts, or REITs. Commercial real estate almost always gets decimated in a crunch, allowing you to buy premium properties at pennies on the dollar. Third, essential sector stocks. Think healthcare, utilities, things people simply cannot stop buying, regardless of what the economy is doing. And finally, broad index funds at historic discounts. Think about it. If the entire market drops 40%, buying the index is essentially buying a guaranteed ticket on the recovery train. Which leads us to your next moves, acting against the herd. Look, having the data and the strategy is one thing, but executing this plan requires the psychology to do something deeply, deeply uncomfortable. You have to act entirely against the herd. So the crucial point is that fortune favors the liquid and the brave. You absolutely need the liquidity, those cash reserves, ready to deploy when the time is right. But the liquidity is completely useless without the bravery. When the news is terrifying, when your friends and family are panicking, when every single instinct in your body tells you to hoard and hide, you have to find the courage to step into the market and buy. That right there is the true secret of the great wealth transfer. The data is clear, the warning signs are flashing, and the timeline is set. The only variable left in this equation is you. When the liquidity crunch hits and the greatest asset sale of the decade begins, you have a major choice to make. Will you panic with the herd and watch your wealth evaporate? Or will you profit with the prepared and change your financial trajectory forever? The choice is entirely yours. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly, highly encourage you to start your preparations today. See you next time.